Section 680.71 requires hydromassage bathtubs to be protected by a GFCI. Both a GFCI breaker or receptacle can be used to protect the hydromassage bathtub. A GFCI breaker provides whole circuit protection, meaning it will protect all devices connected to the circuit, including the bathtub and any other electrical appliances. It is typically located in the electrical panel. A GFCI receptacle is installed at the point of use, next to the bathtub. It only protects devices plugged into that specific receptacle. For hydromassage bathtubs, a GFCI breaker is typically preferred because it provides more comprehensive protection for the entire circuit. This is especially important because hydromassage bathtubs often have multiple electrical components that could pose a risk of electric shock. Yes, a switch is required to shut off the bathtub motor and pump when not in use. This switch is typically installed near a bathtub or in a convenient location for the user. It should be clearly labeled to indicate its purpose. The controls provided with the tub may not include a dedicated shut-off switch. If this is the case, a separate switch must be installed according to the manufacturer's instructions. When choosing between a GFCI breaker and a GFCI receptacle for a hydromassage bathtub, there are several factors to consider. Firstly, the level of protection is paramount. A GFCI breaker offers whole circuit protection. This means it protects not only the bathtub itself, but also all other devices and wiring connected to that specific circuit. In contrast, a GFCI receptacle only protects devices plugged directly into it. For a hydromassage bathtub, this distinction is critical because these tubs often have multiple electrical components such as pumps, heaters, and lights, all of which could potentially pose a risk of electric shock. Secondly, consider the convenience and accessibility. GFCI breakers are typically located in the electrical panel, which might be in a basement, garage, or utility room. While this placement provides comprehensive protection, it also means that resetting the GFCI after a trip requires going to the panel. GFCI receptacles, on the other hand, are installed right next to the bathtub, offering easy access for resetting. However, they only protect the immediate outlet and any devices connected to it. Thirdly, compliance with electrical codes is essential. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, provides specific guidelines for the installation of electrical equipment in bathrooms, including hydromassage bathtubs. Section 680.71 of the NEC mandates GFCI protection for these bathtubs. Local codes may have additional requirements or variations on these rules, so it's always wise to consult with a qualified electrician to ensure full compliance. Fourthly, consider the existing electrical infrastructure. If the circuit serving the hydromassage bathtub already has other outlets or devices connected to it, a GFCI breaker is the better choice because it protects everything on that circuit. If the bathtub has its own dedicated circuit, a GFCI receptacle might suffice, but the overall level of protection would still be less comprehensive compared to a GFCI breaker. Fifthly, think about the ease of installation. Installing a GFCI breaker typically requires working within the electrical panel, which can be more complex and potentially hazardous. It's generally recommended to hire a licensed electrician for this task. Installing a GFCI receptacle is usually simpler, but it still requires basic electrical knowledge and adherence to safety precautions. Always turn off the power to the circuit before working on any electrical components. The requirement for a dedicated shut-off switch is also crucial. This switch allows the user to quickly and safely turn off the bathtub's motor and pump when not in use, preventing potential hazards. The switch should be clearly labeled and easily accessible, usually installed near the bathtub or in a convenient location for the user. It's important to note that the controls provided with the tub may not include a dedicated shut-off switch. If this is the case, a separate switch must be installed according to the manufacturer's instructions. This is not merely a suggestion but a safety requirement. When installing the shut-off switch, make sure it is rated for the appropriate voltage and amperage of the bathtub's motor and pump. Using an undersized switch could lead to overheating and potential fire hazards. Also, the switch should be installed in a location where it won't be exposed to water or excessive moisture. Bathrooms are inherently damp environments, so proper sealing and protection are essential. In summary, while both GFCI breakers and receptacles can provide GFCI protection for hydromassage bathtubs, a GFCI breaker is generally preferred due to its comprehensive whole-circuit protection. Additionally, a dedicated shut-off switch is required for safety, regardless of the type of GFCI protection used. Always consult with a qualified electrician to ensure proper installation and compliance with all applicable electrical codes. Now let's dive deeper into the technical aspects of GFCI protection. A GFCI, or ground fault circuit interrupter, is a safety device designed to protect against electrical shock. It works by monitoring the current flowing into and out of a circuit. If there is any imbalance, even a tiny difference of a few milliamperes, the GFCI will quickly trip, cutting off the power to the circuit. This is important because a ground fault can occur when electricity flows through an unintended path, such as through a person's body. This can happen if there is a break in the insulation of a wire, or if a device comes into contact with water. GFCIs are designed to trip very quickly, typically within a fraction of a second, which can prevent serious injury or even death. The sensitivity of a GFCI is typically set at 5 milliamperes, meaning it will trip if it detects a difference of 5 milliamps or more between the incoming and outgoing current. This is far below the level that would cause significant harm to a person. There are two main types of GFCIs: GFCI breakers and GFCI receptacles. GFCI breakers are installed in the electrical panel and provide protection for the entire circuit. GFCI receptacles are installed at the point of use, such as in a bathroom or kitchen, and only protect devices plugged into that specific receptacle. When choosing between a GFCI breaker and a GFCI receptacle, there are several factors to consider. Firstly, the level of protection is important. A GFCI breaker offers whole circuit protection, which means it will protect all devices connected to the circuit. This is particularly important in bathrooms, where there are often multiple electrical appliances and fixtures. A GFCI receptacle, on the other hand, only protects devices plugged into that specific receptacle. Secondly, consider the ease of installation. GFCI breakers are typically more difficult to install than GFCI receptacles, as they require working within the electrical panel. It is generally recommended to hire a licensed electrician for this task. GFCI receptacles are relatively easy to install, but it is still important to follow all safety precautions and turn off the power to the circuit before working on any electrical components. Thirdly, consider the cost. GFCI breakers are typically more expensive than GFCI receptacles. However, they offer more comprehensive protection, which may be worth the extra cost. In the case of hydromassage bathtubs, the NEC requires GFCI protection. Section 680.71 specifically addresses the requirements for these types of bathtubs. The code mandates that all electrical components of the hydromassage bathtub, including the pump, heater, and lights, must be protected by a GFCI. The reason for this requirement is that hydromassage bathtubs are inherently risky environments. They involve water, electricity, and close proximity to the human body. Any fault in the electrical system could potentially lead to a serious electric shock. In addition to GFCI protection, the NEC also requires a dedicated equipment grounding conductor for hydromassage bathtubs. This grounding conductor provides a path for fault current to flow back to the electrical panel, which helps to trip the breaker and shut off the power to the circuit. The equipment grounding conductor must be properly sized and installed according to the NEC. Another important safety requirement for hydromassage bathtubs is the installation of a disconnect switch. This switch allows the user to quickly and easily turn off the power to the bathtub in case of an emergency. The disconnect switch must be readily accessible and clearly labeled. It should be located within sight of the bathtub and at least 5 feet away from the bathtub. The NEC also specifies the type of wiring that is allowed to be used for hydromassage bathtubs. The wiring must be suitable for wet locations and must be protected from physical damage. The wiring must also be properly sized to handle the load of the bathtub's electrical components. When installing a hydromassage bathtub, it is important to follow all of the manufacturer's instructions. The manufacturer's instructions will provide specific details on the installation process, including the wiring requirements, the grounding requirements, and the disconnect switch requirements. It is also important to consult with a qualified electrician to ensure that the installation is done correctly and safely. A qualified electrician will be familiar with the NEC and will be able to ensure that the bathtub is installed in compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. In addition to the NEC requirements, there may also be local codes and regulations that apply to hydromassage bathtubs. It is important to check with the local building department to determine if there are any additional requirements. Proper GFCI protection is essential for the safe operation of hydromassage bathtubs. By following the NEC requirements and consulting with a qualified electrician, you can ensure that your hydromassage bathtub is installed safely and correctly. Now let's delve into some common misconceptions about GFCI protection. Firstly, some people believe that a GFCI only protects against shocks from touching a live wire. While it's true that a GFCI will trip if someone touches a live wire and provides a path to ground, it also protects against other types of ground faults. For example, if a wire inside an appliance shorts to the metal casing, a GFCI will detect this ground fault and trip, even if no one touches the appliance. Secondly, some people think that a GFCI will protect against overloads or short circuits. GFCIs are not designed to protect against these types of faults. Overloads and short circuits are typically protected by circuit breakers or fuses. A GFCI is specifically designed to detect ground faults, which are different from overloads and short circuits. Thirdly, some people believe that a GFCI will last forever. GFCIs do have a limited lifespan and should be tested regularly to ensure that they are working properly. The manufacturer's instructions will typically provide guidance on how often to test the GFCI. A simple test involves pressing the test button on the GFCI, which should cause it to trip. If the GFCI does not trip when the test button is pressed, it should be replaced. Fourthly, some people think that a GFCI will work even if it's not properly grounded. GFCIs rely on a proper ground connection to function correctly. If the ground connection is missing or faulty, the GFCI may not trip in the event of a ground fault. It's important to ensure that all electrical outlets and circuits are properly grounded. Fifthly, some people believe that a GFCI is a substitute for proper wiring practices. GFCIs are a valuable safety device, but they are not a substitute for following proper wiring practices. It's important to use the correct wire size, make proper connections, and protect wires from physical damage. GFCI should be considered as an additional layer of protection, not a replacement for safe wiring practices. Now, let's discuss some best practices for installing and maintaining GFCI protection. Firstly, always follow the manufacturer's instructions when installing a GFCI. The manufacturer's instructions will provide specific details on the installation process, including the wiring connections and the testing procedures. Secondly, ensure that the GFCI is properly grounded. The ground connection is essential for the GFCI to function correctly. Check the ground connection with a multimeter to verify that it is properly connected. Thirdly, test the GFCI regularly. The manufacturer's instructions will typically provide guidance on how often to test the GFCI. A simple test involves pressing the test button on the GFCI, which should cause it to trip. Fourthly, replace the GFCI if it fails the test. If the GFCI does not trip when the test button is pressed, it should be replaced. GFCIs have a limited lifespan and should be replaced periodically. Fifthly, protect the GFCI from moisture and physical damage. GFCIs are sensitive electronic devices and should be protected from moisture and physical damage. Install the GFCI in a dry location and protect it from impact. Sixthly, use a qualified electrician for complex installations. If you are not comfortable working with electricity, it is best to hire a qualified electrician to install the GFCI. A qualified electrician will be familiar with the NEC and will be able to ensure that the installation is done correctly and safely. Seventhly, keep the area around the GFCI clear. Do not block the GFCI with furniture or other objects. The GFCI should be easily accessible in case it needs to be reset. 8thly, educate yourself about GFCI protection. The more you know about GFCI protection, the better you will be able to protect yourself and your family from electrical shock. Read the manufacturer's instructions, consult with a qualified electrician, and stay informed about the latest safety practices. Now let's focus on the specific requirements for the disconnect switch for a hydromassage bathtub. Firstly, the disconnect switch must be readily accessible. This means that it should be located in a place where it can be easily reached in case of an emergency. The switch should not be hidden behind furniture or other objects. Secondly, the disconnect switch must be clearly labeled. The label should clearly indicate that the switch controls the power to the hydromassage bathtub. This will help to prevent confusion in an emergency situation. Thirdly, the disconnect switch must be located within sight of the hydromassage bathtub. This means that the switch should be visible from the bathtub. This will allow the user to quickly turn off the power to the bathtub in case of an emergency. Fourthly, the disconnect switch must be located at least 5 feet away from the hydromassage bathtub. This is to prevent the user from being able to touch the switch while they are in the bathtub. This is an important safety precaution. Fifthly, the disconnect switch must be rated for the appropriate voltage and amperage. The switch must be able to handle the load of the hydromassage bathtub's electrical components. Using an undersized switch could lead to overheating and potential fire hazards. Sixthly, the disconnect switch must be installed in a dry location. The switch should not be exposed to water or excessive moisture. Bathrooms are inherently damp environments, so proper sealing and protection are essential. Seventhly, the disconnect switch must be installed according to the manufacturer's instructions. The manufacturer's instructions will provide specific details on the installation process, including the wiring connections and the mounting procedures. Eighthly, the disconnect switch must be inspected regularly. The switch should be inspected periodically to ensure that it is working properly. Check the switch for any signs of damage or wear. Ninthly, replace the disconnect switch if it is damaged or worn. If the switch is damaged or worn, it should be replaced immediately. A damaged or worn switch could pose a safety hazard. Tenthly, use a qualified electrician for the installation. It is always best to hire a qualified electrician to install the disconnect switch. A qualified electrician will be familiar with the NEC and will be able to ensure that the installation is done correctly and safely.